Hey everyone, so I want to talk about the new Pokemon games that released today, Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet. I want to say right off the bat that I am going to do my best to avoid spoiling any story for you, but I did record quite a bit of game footage, some of which includes Pokemon and other aspects of the game that haven't been officially announced before, and I will also be talking about some new mechanics of the game, so just be wary of that. This video will just be me, a casual gamer and longtime fan of the franchise, sharing my thoughts about the new game with you. With all that said, let's start with my overall opinion of the game, having played the Scarlet version for a few hours now. I will say also that none of my thoughts, praises, or criticisms are version specific, so you can extend them to Violet as well. Overall, I'd honestly say it's a good game. Every new set of games comes with its quirks and imperfections, which I will get into, but I think Pokemon Scarlet and Violet has a lot going for it. There are some super interesting characters and backstories that I'm excited to continue exploring, plus a whole new host of Pokemon to get to know and battle with. The more open world style makes it easier to explore the new region, and the different storylines is helpful for that as well. To some extent, you can do the various stories in any order you want, or even do them concurrently. There are some areas that are much harder to get to without ride Pokemon upgrades, to sort of dissuade you from heading to certain areas before you're ready, but generally you can head to most areas of the map pretty much right away, which I think is cool. I'm not sure how well they did the difficulty levels of the different tasks in each storyline. For example, the challenges don't seem to scale with your progress or level. I accidentally did what I now presume to be the second challenge of one story first, and found it a good level of difficulty. Then I stumbled upon one that was meant to be done much later in the quest, before ending up at what I think was meant to be the first one, and by that point the first one barely posed a challenge. I feel like they could have implemented a system that maybe looked at how many gym badges you had, for example, and scaled the difficulty based on that. It's like they had a correct order to do them in, and they do imply in some dialogues which tasks you should tackle first, but it doesn't seem like they implemented a system for if you want to do them in your own order. Doing them out of order can make some of the challenges incredibly underwhelming, so that feels like it could have been implemented slightly better. Sometimes it even seems like tasks from different storylines that are in the same area are of vastly different levels, which I guess is better for exploration, but I found it confusing. If they're not going to scale the difficulty with your progress through each story, then they should at least make the order more clear. Even some character dialogue to act as a suggestion for which one should be next or something like that would be helpful, even just to let you know that you've done them out of order. Speaking of scaling difficulty, they've done the same things that they do in linear games in terms of Pokemon of one area being a similar level, but applied it to their more open world concept. Even Legends Arceus, which was pretty open, had a strict gatekeeping policy where you had to reach a specific star rating before you could enter certain areas. And areas being locked behind challenges means you normally end up roughly an appropriate level for the next section. However, with how they've applied it to this game, it becomes easy to end up in an area where you're either overleveled or underleveled, which can be a little confusing. In Sword and Shield, the levels of Pokemon in the wild area scaled with how many gym badges you had, which meant that every time you went through that zone, it still posed enough of a challenge to be interesting, without sort of being overwhelming. And it would have been nice if this game had a similar concept, but so far in my playthrough it doesn't seem like this is the case. I like that they kept the little challenges in the gym, even though I've only done a couple so far. They can sometimes be a little tedious depending on the challenge, and sometimes it feels like they aren't based on any skill, but overall I think it's a fun feature and I am glad they chose to keep that. Another cool feature is that TMs are craftable in this game. You get the components from battling wild Pokemon, which feels like a good balance for single-use TMs. I don't feel like reusable TMs was the right decision, but the original single-use TMs that were really hard to come by also felt incorrect, because then I just never used them, so this feels like a step in the right direction. Speaking of new mechanics, I am not sure how I feel about Terastallizing. I get that following Dynamax Pokemon, Z moves, Mega Evolutions, etc., they maybe felt like they needed a special battle mechanic to go along with this game. Terastallizing changes the Pokemon's type to their Terra type and removes other typing, which makes it feel a little bit niche in my opinion. Maybe I'll get better at the strategy of Terastallizing as I continue playing the game, but for now, it's not really doing much for me. It was exciting to see the new Pokemon and regional variants that this game introduced, and I love seeing them wandering around the overworld. I appreciate they've gone for more realistically sized sprites. I do feel like some of the smallest models are too small in both the overworld and the battle screens. Part of me wonders if they saw the popularity of that mod for Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl that changed the size of the Pokemon. Anyway, the smallest Pokemon can be really hard to see, and sometimes they end up obscured by the grass or even the models of other Pokemon, or even just end up too small to identify. It feels like that could have been added as an optional feature for accessibility purposes, where you could toggle whether the biggest and smallest ones are true to size or not. Honestly, a lot of times it feels like they don't consider accessibility that much in their games, like in Sword and Shield, where you had to speak to a specific NPC to unlock the setting that lets you change the audio mixing, which would be an important feature for some people with hearing difficulties, for example. Like I said, they don't seem to consider how the choices they make affect the game's accessibility. So while I do think this is overall an interesting feature, I think they should have made realistically sized models optional. Actually, speaking of Pokemon in the overworld, there is a feature in the game called Let's Go where you can let your partner Pokemon free roam near your character. They can go off and fight other Pokemon and collect items for you, which I think is a nice feature, particularly if you're just trying to grind for experience in an area, because it ends up quicker than a traditional battle. I have found it's kind of hard to recall them once they're mid-action. For example, if they go into a fight with a wild Pokemon that you don't want them to, and they can end up losing a lot of HP when you don't intend them to. I've also found the throw, aiming, and the lock-on mechanisms can be a bit fiddly, but that could just be me. They've kept some of the Legends Arceus features like in-place battles, but have gone back to lots of the move mechanics and other aspects from previous mainline games. So while Legends Arceus felt more like a spin-off game to me in terms of mechanics, you can definitely see how Scarlet and Violet is sort of the product of Pokemon Sword and Shield and Pokemon Legends Arceus, which I think is interesting. Another point about battles is that you're not forced to engage in trainer battles in this game. They're an optional interaction, and it feels like they've made them a little more challenging as a result, which I think makes them more enjoyable. In previous games, it sometimes felt like trainers had slightly leveled down teams for the area that they were in, where now I think they pose a decent level of challenge. But for those people who don't like that aspect of the games, you don't have to take part, or you can wait until you're more ready, which I like. Right now, there do seem to be some visual bugs with the game, where items in the background or assets that are further from the player don't run at the same frame rate, which can make them appear kind of jumpy. It almost feels like the Switch isn't powerful enough for the game that they're trying to run, which doesn't make sense because obviously it was designed for the Switch. I'm not sure if they'll be releasing a patch for that, but it can be a little distracting to see. Other than that though, and some issues with models clipping through the ground or clipping through other models, it is mostly a good looking game. I personally can't speak to the authenticity of the region to its geographical inspirations, but it is a visually pleasing game in a lot of ways once you get past the bugs. It feels like they could have filled out some of the landscapes a tiny bit more so that they didn't feel quite so empty, but I appreciate that would have made performance issues worse. Plus it is nice to have space to move around and to see the Pokemon running around as well, so maybe they just didn't want it to feel too crowded. But yeah, overall I would say the game looks really good, which is a plus. While we're talking about graphics and visuals, I do want to quickly mention the sandwich animations, which I have seen tweets circulating about. I like the whole picnic mechanic in general, where, like the campsites of Sword and Shield, you can make a little meal to heal up your Pokemon, and you can play with them a bit, which is fun, but the little animation that they do after you've made the sandwich really feels so lazy, and it looks so comically bad, in my opinion. I don't really know about animation, but it just looks like such a big downgrade from the one they gave us for the curry in Sword and Shield, and it just makes it feel kind of half-assed, honestly. It feels like it's been a while since a Pokemon game was released and people didn't have a sizable number of complaints. Reasonable complaints, I think. But I guess that comes with more ambitious game mechanics. I saw a tweet noting that Pokemon is putting out a game content pretty much every year now, and it does kind of end up making things feel rushed and lacking. Honestly, the last couple of Pokemon games haven't hit the same for me. Nostalgia carried Brilliant Diamond for me, while Legends Arceus fell a bit flat, and I don't have much interest in finishing it. But I don't feel the same about Scarlet and Violet. Despite my criticisms, I do think it is going to be a good game. Right now it does feel a little unfinished, but I think it'll be a great game in a couple of updates' time. I almost wonder if the team just isn't being allowed the time they need for such an ambitious game. It feels like they're close to an excellent experience with this game, though, and I guess I can see why they haven't quite delivered it yet. So far, I would say the new Pokemon game is looking pretty promising overall. Some of the complaints I have could probably be improved with a couple of patches, and the rest I hope they'll consider implementing for the next game. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet introduces a lot of cool features that I'm excited to keep playing with. I love being able to explore the world of Pokemon in a more open world way, even if I feel it could be improved slightly, and I am really looking forward to playing more of this game and to see what they do next. If you end up playing any of Pokemon Scarlet or Violet, let me know what you think of it down in the comments, and maybe also leave a like so I know you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more content from me, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and you can also follow me on Twitch where I do live streams 3 days a week. Thank you so much for watching this video, and take care of yourselves. Bye friends!